So this lesson is going to be on states of matter. Now this word matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. So when we talk about states of matter, there's typically 3 states on the GD test. There's probably a few more states than this, but the main states are the gas state, the liquid state, or the solid state. For most of us, when we think of this type of topic here, most time we're thinking of this H2O. So, H2O is kind of what we refer to as a water molecule. Again, a molecule is when you have more than one atom present. If it's got 2 different types of atoms present, like hydrogen and oxygen here, this is kind of called a compound molecule. But a molecule has 2 or more atoms present. So H2O would actually be considered a molecule, or this is actually going to be called a compound molecule since it's made up of different elements, hydrogen and oxygen. So 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen molecule make up water. So a lot of times when we think about states of matter, the example that we go to is water. When it comes to water, we think of it more in the liquid state. But a liquid can be turned into a gas. So I don't know if you've ever boiled water on a stove. The water could actually boil out. Again, it doesn't actually disappear. It just turns into a different form. It turns into a gaseous form, which you can't see. It's now in the air, and it's invisible to our eyes at this point. So water can also be turned colder. So if it's turned colder, it kind of what refreezes or turns into what we call ice. So ice would be an example of something that's solid. So we have this liquid, this gas, and this solid. There's going to be another video that's going to kind of explain the difference between a liquid state, a solid state, and a gaseous state. But like I said, when you get into these states of matter, it's like, how do we get into these different states of matter? Well, again, when I think of water, I think of the liquid state. So a lot of times water to me is in the form of, it's like I said, it's in a liquid form. So notice how here, if I want water, I can't hold it in my hand. It just kind of runs to my fingers a lot of times. I usually have to have a glass to hold my water in. But notice that water can, what we refer to as evaporate. If it evaporates, it's turning into a gaseous form. So evaporation is when a liquid turns into a gas. Also, a gas can actually turn into a liquid. This is called condensation. I don't know if you've ever woke up in the morning and there's like dew on the ground. You went to bed last night and the grass is dry. You get up this morning and you walk through the grass and your feet get soaking wet. That's that dew. That's where it didn't rain last night. Just the gas condenses, it gets cool enough that it actually turns back into a liquid state. So if we go from a liquid to a gas, that's described as evaporation. If we go from a gas to a liquid, that is described as condensation. A liquid also can turn into a solid. We call that freezing. A solid can turn into a liquid. A lot of times we use that word melting. So notice how they're using these little red arrows and green blue arrows. They're actually saying if liquid gets warmed up to a boiling point, it turns into a gas. And if gas gets to a cool enough temperature, it'll turn back into water. And if water gets cold enough, it'll turn into ice. And if ice gets warm enough, it'll melt and turn into liquid. Now, these words that we may not be as familiar with is when a gas turns into a solid. So I don't know how that works I'm not as familiar with these words, but a gas can turn into a solid, and that's called deposition. Deposition is when a gas turns into a solid. A solid can turn into a gas, and that's what we call sublimation. So sublimation is another word that I'm not as familiar with. I'm more familiar with evaporation, condensation, freezing, and melting. But like I said, most of my stuff is associated with water. But keep in mind, there is like when we talk about metals, like gold, you know, gold can be found on Earth as a solid, but it can be melted down and formed into other things like gold bars and things like that. Um, it would probably take a lot of heat to make gold turn into a gas, but I'm sure if anything gets hot enough, it can actually turn into a gas as well. So, but I don't know how that all works as far as how gold would turn into a gas. I would have to leave that to somebody with a little bit more of a degree than I do. Okay. Something else, they kind of point out here, temperature has a lot to do with states of matter. And notice that, when it comes to gases, notice how the molecules are really far apart. In a solid, they're a lot closer together than they are in a gas. But if you look down here at a solid, notice how in a solid, the molecules are very organized and structured and things like that. So they're a lot much closer together. So that's one of the things that's cool about solids, liquids, and gases is the molecular structure of how closely together the molecules are to each other. So that's kind of a quick lesson on states of matter.